So how goes that theocracy in the United States? Seriously, there are people out there working to create and maintain one. And now there is a case going to the U.S. Supreme Court. On the line with us is Rachel Laser, the president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, whose legal team is actually representing the Bremerton School District in this case. It's coming up. AU.org is Americans United's website. Rachel Laser is, her Twitter handle is Rachel K. Laser, or at Americans United. Rachel, welcome to the program. Tell me about Joseph Kennedy.
Thank you. Nice to be with you and your listeners. So this is a case about a football coach in a public school, that's important, Joe Kennedy, who violated the religious freedom of his students by pressuring them to pray with him at the 50-yard line immediately after games, right when the team huddle usually occurs, right at that 50-yard line. The school district tried to work with him to say, look, you can't do that, right? You can't on official duty pressure students to pray with you. That's a clear violation of the First Amendment of our Constitution, but we'd love to find a way for you to still pray, just in a way that doesn't pressure students. And he flat out rejected their multiple overtures, said he only wanted to be able to pray in a way that students could join him, and continued, and then he sued the school district.
And it wasn't just that students could join him, it was the students must join him. Do I have that right? Well, that he was the coach of the team?
There is actually some psychologists wrote in about the constitution of the teenager psyche, right? And they said that coaches, as we all know and remember, play a super important role. They're role models. They can feel like parents. Students fear them. You know, the court has written before about the pressure that can be applied on kids when other students are joining in with teachers or coaches, and there's an enormous peer and public pressure as well. So when you head to the 50-yard line directly following a game, right where the team huddle occurs, you are putting pressure on your students to join you there, right? They're expected to show up, and that's why they all did. Yeah. And the record shows actually that students' parents came forward and said, my student felt pressured to pray to play. And when the coach wasn't there praying, no students were.
Now, this would just be a local story in Bremerton. What state is this in? Washington.
This is Washington State, yeah.
This would just be a local Bremerton, Washington story were it not for the fact that a shadowy group of right-wing wannabe theocrats are pushing this to the U.S. Supreme Court. Tell us about that.
It's remarkable, and the place to go is on the SCOTUS website. You can see who wrote to the court to express their support for the coach, and it is a who's who of extremists in this country. It's the drafter of the Texas abortion ban. It's John Eastman, the architect of the fake election. It's the groups that are anti-LGBTQ, anti-Muslim, anti-reproductive freedom, the DeVosses, and I mean it's sort of everyone who you would think would be there. The Hawley and Ted Cruz's. And why? Because religious extremists and their lawmaker allies are using the coach actually as a pawn to advance an agenda to get the court to reinterpret our sacred concept of religious freedom to be something that gives favor to one particular type of religious observance over all others, which is flat out unconstitutional.
So what is the argument that they are going to be making before the U.S. Supreme Court? What's the argument that you're going to be making in rebuttal to that? And how are you anticipating the court will receive this?
Let me start with the first part, which is a little bit easier. So, he'll be arguing that he has a free exercise right to do this, but he's using false facts. And I really want to emphasize that. Look at any picture, and it is evident that the story that the coach and his lawyers are telling is false. And the lower courts actually used that strong language. They called the story that the coach is painting false and deceitful. Really strong language. That was a George W. Bush appointee, Ninth Circuit judge. Wow. So he's saying, I have a right to pray in a private and personal manner. But what's really happening, and actually I can hold up my picture, is this is the coach with holding up a football helmet surrounded by students. There's nothing private or personal about it.
Right.
So he'll try to make the argument that he has a free exercise right to pray in a private and personal way. And what we'll say back is, actually, the school district has a right to control the speech of teachers and coaches because when they're speaking on behalf of the school. And clearly at a football game event for the school which he repeatedly prayed at when a coach is praying at the 50-yard line immediately following games, that's speaking for the school. The school has a right to control that speech, and there aren't First Amendment exceptions. But even if the court finds that this is a guy who's praying in a private way, which would be alarming given the facts, that there's a balancing test that takes place. And what we're weighing against, what he's declaring as his blanket right, his uninhibited right to free exercise of religion, is the other part of the First Amendment, which is the Establishment Clause, which protects everybody's religious freedom in the way it works with the Free Exercise Clause. And it puts limits. It says, actually, the state cannot endorse a religion. You can't pray when you're a public official such that you would be compelling students to join you because that's a violation of their religious freedom. What about the Jewish student? What about the atheist student? What about the Christian student who believes that you shouldn't pray in an ostentatious manner, that Jesus said that? And so,
in the Sermon on the Mount.
And so that's what we'll be arguing back.
I think I'm remembering correctly that back in the day, and this was, literally back in the 60s or thereabouts, that the Supreme Court in a similar case ruled that you can have in a public school a moment of silence, but to do virtually anything else is to endorse a religion, if not just, praying to a god, being endorsing monotheism. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, basically there are decades, starting from the 1960s, of case law that have been supported by conservative and liberal justices alike that protect school children's religious freedom and that recognize that children are impressionable, that they are captive at school, they have to report to school, and that are very careful to protect their religious freedom. And if the court rules against the Bremerton School District, students K through 12 across this country could be forced to pray again in school. And parents need to be concerned because we think as parents that we get to control, sort of the upbringing of our kids religiously, and we would, it's alarming to think as parents that schools now are going to be able to pressure our students to practice a religion that's not our own. Very alarming.
I remember, I was in elementary school in the 1950s, and I remember a friend of mine who lived a couple of houses away from me. His name was Tom Stedman, and he was Jewish. And we had school prayer. Every morning, the principal would come on the PA and do this prayer, and the principal was really into Jesus, and the prayer had, Jesus in it all the time. And I remember Tom telling me that he was uncomfortable with that. I didn't quite understand exactly why. I'm talking about like when I was 9 years old. But you're saying that we're going to go back to that.
Yes, because if the court buys this false narrative and says that when a coach who's praying at the 50-yard line during the team huddle is praying privately, can't you imagine that teachers, as students are entering their classroom, could just be reading the Lord's Prayer out loud privately and to themselves, right? It's the same false narrative. And there we are again, back where we were and what you described, Tom.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Well, Rachel, keep us up to date on it, okay?
Thanks so much for having me on the show. And everybody go and join AU.org, please.
Amen. Americans United for Separation of Church and State. AU.org is the website. Rachel K. Laser or Americans United on Twitter. Rachel, thanks again for the great work you're doing.